No water. Excuse me while I get my beverage. It's water, I promise. The words of Reverend Leslie Takahashi. All that we have ever loved and all that we have ever been stands with us on the brink of all that we aspire to create. A deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a deeper joy in this life we share. It had been a long, long time since it happened. Since someone asked me that question so popular here in Fresno. It had been such a long time since someone asked me those three little words. Yesterday, I was at Lowe's waiting in the backed up self-service checkout line. To pass the time, I smiled at and then started talking to an earnest-looking young couple ahead of me in line, talking about the weather, the early summer, and their favorite Fresno roadside vegetable stand. That's when the three-word question, that dreaded three-word question, came, first preceded by this familiar preamble. Do you attend a church? Oh no, here it comes, I thought. And then they asked, are you saved? Anybody get that question? Yeah? Now, truth be told, usually I dodge that question. I've learned living in Fresno that trying to have a conversation with someone who is intent on converting me rather than intent on listening and having a conversation turns into a dead-end waste of time. But yesterday was different. I'm not sure why. Maybe I was feeling a bit feisty because I was excited that today we'd be welcoming new church members and I'd be preaching about the loving embrace of Unitarian Universalism. So rather than playing it safe and tap dancing around that three-word question, I smiled at that earnest young couple and replied, I am saved. I am saved from needing to believe that there's only one way to be spiritual and religious. Oh, that poor couple. They suddenly look like they wish they could disappear. Or even better yet, they look like they wish I would disappear. I continued, I am saved. I am saved from needing to believe that Jesus is the only way, truth, and light. I'm glad he is for you, truly, but I'm saved from needing to believe that that's true for me. I'm saved from needing to believe that the only doorway to infinite love is through a conservative and a limiting interpretation of what is a beautiful religion called Christianity. I am saved. I am saved from believing in original sin, saved from the belief that we are shameful sinners destined to burn in the fires of hell. I'm saved from believing that in order for the universe to love me, I need to accept my innate depravity. Dear ones, we are saved. Could you just say that with me? We are saved. As Unitarian Universalists, we are saved from an ideology of division and diminishment. Saved from an ideology that, as Laurie said earlier in the service, builds walls between people in order to separate and conquer. Saved from an ideology that lifts some people up in order to push other people down. Saved from a white political Christian nationalism that takes, distorts, and perverts Jesus' initial message of an equitable love and respect for all. As Unitarian Universalists, we're saved from believing that there is a limited amount of worth and dignity in the universe, and it's available only to a certain type of person who thinks or acts a certain way, who accepts someone else's definition of goodness and love. Now, I know the word saved makes some of us uncomfortable, so let's just acknowledge that. But I truly believe that Unitarian Universalism is a saving faith because, and I quote Reverend Roy Phillips, Unitarian Universalism calls no one a sinner, yet knows how deep is the struggle and how great is the hunger for what is good. And I would argue that is what was also at the heart of Jesus' message. That is what is at the heart of Jesus' teachings. I believe Unitarian Universalism is a saving faith because, as my late father-in-law, the Reverend Herbert Vedder, proclaimed, Unitarian Universalists believe in the wholeness of life made known as awakening love within the human heart. And I just want to stop there for a second because I love this, that our wholeness and the wholeness of life comes from something that awakens in our human heart. It doesn't come from somewhere else, and it's bestowed upon us. It is our opening of the heart to love. Reverend Herbert Vedder continued, we believe in the goodness of life, of new life struggling to be born, of all life yearning for fulfillment. All life yearning for fulfillment, not just a set-apart few. We believe that beneath brokenness lies seeds of new creation. We believe that beneath brokenness lies seeds of new creation. Rather than erasing our brokenness through divine salvation, rather than being perfected by some transcendent power for life after death, we believe we save ourselves through embracing, understanding, and celebrating our humanness, which includes our imperfections and flaws. And since I already took the poll and asked if anybody here was perfect, we know we all have imperfections. We all have flaws. Anybody willing to own that with me? Okay. You may have heard of the Japanese art form known as kintsugi. Tiffany Ayuda, a freelance journalist, writes, kintsugi is the Japanese art of putting broken pottery pieces back together with gold. Built on the idea that embracing flaws and imperfections, you can create an even stronger, more beautiful piece of art. Every break is unique, and instead of repairing an item like new, the 400-year-old technique actually highlights the scars as part of the design. And just look at how beautiful it is. Using this as a metaphor for healing ourselves teaches us an important lesson. Sometimes in the process of repairing things that have been broken, we actually create something more unique, beautiful, and resilient. Tiffany Ayuda quotes kintsugi artist Candice Kumai. Everyone goes through tough times, and leading a life of perfection isn't necessarily realistic. That's the understatement of the year. Kitsuji shows you that you are better with your golden cracks. And I'm sticking this quote in here, Ian. You don't have it on your script. As John Wellwood writes, open your heart to who you are right now, not who you would like to be, not the saint you are striving to become, but the being right here before you, inside you, around you. All of you is holy. All of you is holy. I'm going to share a true story. It's one that I was given permission to share. That's real important to say. And I'm going to cop that I have shared it multiple times over the last few years, but I feel it's worth hearing again and again, especially on this New Member Sunday, especially in these times when so many of us are struggling with anxiety, depression, isolation, overwhelm, exhaustion, and pandemic-induced trauma and fatigue. It was a rainy Sunday morning in early December, the day she first crossed the threshold and stepped into the church. This was years ago in another part of the country, in another congregation that I was then serving. I remember seeing Sarah enter. Her hair was damp. She looked rushed and anxious. We were well into singing our opening hymn, and under the cover of that song, she slipped into the last seat on the left side of the sanctuary. I noticed her a couple times during the service, but she did not seem engaged at all. Her eyes just stared out the window. At the end of the service, as is typical, I invited everybody to stand and join hands for the benediction. This was obviously pre-pandemic when it could join hands. And then I began my favorite words to close a service. Go now in peace. May you leave this place knowing you are good and knowing you are loved. The service ended. Sarah quickly slipped out the sanctuary doors, talking to no one. But she came back the following Sunday. Week after week, she came back. Her rushed and anxious energy became slower and more centered. Within a year, she had found her place because she had made a decision to get involved. She realized that getting involved was the way some folks turn a church from a place you are visiting to a congregation in which you belong. She was part of our social justice team, helping steer our marriage equality work at the State House. And she was also coordinating the volunteer ushers each week. Sarah met a wonderful woman at church. They fell in love, and they were planning their wedding. She had found her spiritual home, and Unitarian Universalism became her chosen faith. A few years later, Sarah told me something. Do you remember that first Sunday I came to church, that rainy, cold Sunday, she asked. Yes, of course I remember, I replied. She went on. What I've never told you was that the day before, on Saturday, I'd just been released from the psych ward where I had been for 10 days after trying to kill myself. I got out on Saturday and I didn't know what I was going to do except that I knew I would try to take my life again in the next week. When I woke up on Sunday morning, I remember feeling like I didn't want to be alone, that I needed to be with other people. Someone had told me about this funky church on the west end of town that welcomed everybody. And I thought, I'll just go sit there so I will not feel so alone. I didn't listen to much of what happened in the service. My head was too much of a jumble. But then at the end of the service, you invited us to stand up and join hands for the closing words. This stranger reached out to me and took my hand in theirs. It had been so long since someone had held my hand. I suddenly didn't feel so completely alone. Then you spoke those benediction words I will never forget. Go now in peace. May you leave this place knowing you are good and knowing you are loved. That was the first time in my life anyone had ever told me I was good. This church, this Unitarian Universalist faith told me that I was good. That moment saved my life. Susan Frederick Gray and Erica A. Hewitt, both Unitarian Universalist ministers, write, "We know that hurt moves through the world, perpetrated by action, inaction, and indifference. Our Unitarian Universalist values calls us to live in the reality of the heartbreak of our world, remembering that no one is outside the circle of our love. We know that things break or break down, promises, friendships, sobriety, hope, communication. This breaking happens because our human hearts and our very institutions are frail and imperfect. We make mistakes. Life is messy. With compassion as our guide, we seek the well-being of all people. We seek to dismantle systems of oppression that undermine our collective humanity. We believe we're here to guide one another toward love because no one is outside the circle of love." Could you say that with me? No one is outside the circle of love. No matter how fractured we are or once were, we can make whole people of ourselves. We are whole at our core because of the great, unnameable, sometimes inconceivable love in which we live. Dear ones, we are saved. We are saved when we remind each other that we are good and we are loved. Could you just say that? We are good and we are loved. We are good and we are loved. Again, we are good and we are loved. One more time like we mean it. We are good and we are loved. All that we have ever loved and all that we have ever been stands with us on the brink of all we aspire to create. A deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a deeper joy into this life we share. Así sea, bendito sea. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.